Hello and welcome. This is Dr. McAllister, your professor for ecology, and a couple of items of business. The first is you need to know that Perspective integrates with Canvas in a very particular way. So to make sure you receive credit for all of your brilliant contributions, please interact with Perspective only through the Canvas module, not by navigating directly to the Perspective website through your browser. Also, there is no textbook required. The textbook is optional if you want to dive deeper into the material. This is something you might consider as a career option. Having the textbook has many resources, scientific articles, and so it's an excellent resource if you would like it. In addition, if you're tired of reading everything on screens, having the textbook in hand could be useful. Research shows reading in different formats helps with retention. Okay, so let's get started and dive right in. Why study ecology? We are living and experiencing right now what happens at a global scale when ecological processes are disrupted by deforestation and climate change. Destroying nature unleashes infectious diseases, and it's not just COVID. Here we're looking at Lyme disease and the spread of Lyme disease. And you can see that in 1996, it was relegated relatively to the northern area of the U.S. and the East Coast. But over time and with climate change, it has now migrated much further south and also to the west as well. In places where wildfires are natural, the suppression of the natural fire regimes has led to megafires, that has replaced them. And many tropical forests are currently being burned because it's the fastest way to convert a forest to a pasture for raising cattle for McDonald's and coffee for Starbucks. We know that social and economic inequality is an ecological issue. And I love this quote by Dr. Shell, who is a professor at the University of Washington. He says that urban ecologists who ignore the geography of race and income in a city do so at the peril of their science. Urban ecologists study ecology of cities, and Dr. Shell is rightly pointing out that we cannot study ecology without studying social and economic inequality. This is true for all other ecological systems, not just those in urban areas. But we also know that studying ecology unlocks incredible potential for new technologies and ways of understanding the world. For example, the scales of butterfly wings inspired an invention for new solar technologies. Both Western medicine and traditional medicine are derived from substances found in the natural world. So no forest, no medicine. All these different concepts I've just presented touch on many different scales of ecology. So what do I mean by scale? Well, scale is all around us. We call this a hierarchical organization of biology. In biology in general, we know cells are nested within tissues, which are nested within organs, which are nested within organisms, and so forth. In ecology, ecological systems are nested within larger systems. An individual is the most fundamental unit of ecology and is the unit of natural selection. Each individual survives and reproduces. The individual approach to ecology emphasizes how an individual's morphology, physiology, behavior enable it to survive and reproduce, and often study adaptations like why this throat or neck area has coloration usually only in males. A group of individuals forms a population. The population dynamics, or increases or decreases in the population, are the unit of evolution. So natural selection acts at the level of the individual, but evolution acts at the level of a population. A group of individuals forms a population, as I mentioned. At this level, ecologists often study the geographic range of populations, the density, the density of individuals in an area, abundances or numbers of individuals, and population dynamics, or increases or decreases in the number of individuals, are the unit of evolution. So again, natural selection acts at the level of the individual, but evolution occurs at the level of a population. Population ecology studies the change in the size of a population, or increases or decreases in the numbers of individuals in an area over time. And later in the semester, we'll talk about population composition, which is a makeup of a population in terms of age or size. The definition of a species is less straightforward because we all learned in high school that species is a group of organisms that can interbreed. And for many species, that definition is just wrong. We know Homo sapiens, for example, bred with Neanderthals. There are some species of salamanders that are all female and only produce daughters which are clones of their mother. So in this case, they don't interbreed at all. But it's still a useful concept for delineating one species from another. The next level of ecological hierarchy is the community. This is where interactions among species occur. So in this example, we're now interested in how this lizard uses plants as shade to cool its body temperature or hide from predators, or how populations may be impacted by predator populations such as birds. The next level of organization is the ecosystem. And an ecosystem is the living organisms and their physical and chemical environment. Ecosystem ecologists like me tend to focus on the movement of energy or carbon and matter between the living and non-living components. For example, most energy that flows through ecosystems is solar energy, which is used to convert carbon dioxide or CO2 in the air to carbon stored in the trunks of trees and leaves. When the trees die, that carbon falls to the bottom of the mangrove here, where microorganisms decompose it. In all these steps, energy is converted, and some is lost as heat, which is radiated back into space. Remember the laws of thermodynamics. And we'll learn more about carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and why these elements are so important to life as we continue on in the semester. The landscape scale includes multiple ecosystems. Okay? And what's important about the landscape is that this connection allows the movement of individuals, populations, matter, and energy. So when landscapes lose connectivity, we see issues with genetic diversity and the flow of nutrients. And when I say lose connectivity, think about when dams are created and that flow of water between these different ecosystems is disrupted. And finally, the highest level of ecological hierarchy is the biosphere, which includes all landscapes and ecosystems on Earth. The biosphere is the ultimate ecological system. All processes of the biosphere are internal, except for the energy from the sun and the energy that is radiated to space. The biosphere holds all materials that it has ever had and retains all the waste that humans generate in the past, or have generated in the past, currently, and then far into the future. Energy is such a fundamental concept in biology that we categorize organisms based on where they get their energy. Organisms that produce their own energy are called producers or primary producers. They use photosynthesis or chemosynthesis to convert solar energy or chemical energy into organic compounds. Remember, organic compounds mean that it's based on carbon. This group contains most plants and algae, as well as some archaea and bacteria. Then there are organisms that derive their energy from other organisms. These are known as consumers or heterotrophs. We are heterotrophs, but there are many different kinds of heterotrophs. Some consume plants, and these would be herbivores, vegetarians. Some consume animals, these would be carnivores, and some consume dead organic matter, detritivores. This group contains organisms like deer and tigers, as well as fungi and some bacteria. Because these categories are human constructs, not all of the organisms fit nicely into these boxes that we've created. So some species derive their energy from a mix of sources, and so we call these mixotrophs, a very creative term. Mixotrophs are common in nature. For example, algae can photosynthesize as well as obtain organic carbon by engulfing bacteria. Carnivorous plants obtain their energy from both photosynthesis as well as from the carbon from consuming invertebrates like insects. There are a number of ways to do ecology. Of course, ecology is a science, so most of the different approaches to doing ecology are based on the scientific method, which is based on making observations, hypotheses, designing an experiment. We know it's not as simple as that, but what is simple is all science is based on observation. And so as a part of learning ecology, we need to learn how to observe. How many of us go about our day without ever really observing the natural world? Well, the next time you're walking to your car or walking around campus, take a second to observe. Pause. What do you see? Do you see birds? Do you see trees in flower or in fruit? Do you feel solar energy being radiated down from outer space? If you do, you are an ecologist. We're all natural-born ecologists. So as a profession, there are several ways of doing ecology. The first is designing an experiment to test some hypothesis. It always starts with an observation. In this example, the observation is that herbivorous insects, like caterpillars, often consume less than 10% of a plant's tissue. Well, why is this? Why don't they eat all of the leaves in a forest? Well, one hypothesis is that predators eat all the insects and keep the insect populations low. Low insect populations can't eat a whole forest. So how do we test this? Well, in the U.S., ecologists working in Missouri observed that birds ate insects feeding on oak leaves, and so they said, aha, the bird population must be keeping the insect population down. They said, okay, well, if we remove the birds, then the insect population should increase, and a larger insect population should eat more birds, should eat more leaves. Well, you can't remove birds, right? That's not really ethical if we got rid of all the birds. But we can exclude the birds from trees using bird-proof netting. And that's what they've done here. And so they did this and replicated it 10 times. So they excluded birds from 10 trees and used 10 trees as control, where they didn't exclude birds, and they measured insect density. And this is what they found. So we're looking at a bar graph here, and it describes insect density and the leaf area consumed in control and in caged areas. And the caged ones were the locations where the birds were kept out. So if birds keep insect populations in check, we expect to find higher insect density and more leaf area consumed when birds are excluded. And that's exactly what these ecologists found. If you look at the orange where the cage is, so if we compare trees in these bird exclosure cages to control trees that had no bird netting, insect density is higher and leaf area consumed is greater. So this is an aha moment where predators appear to have an impact on the number of insects, but also they have an impact of how much of these leaves those herbivorous insects are consuming. And this is known as a trophic cascade, which we'll get into later in the semester as well. For some questions, though, you can't do experiments for an entire lake or an entire forest. So instead, other experiments make use of microcosms, or in this case, mesocosms, which are simplified ecological systems that attempt to replicate essential features of an ecological system in a laboratory or a field setting. At the Rice River Center, for example, they have these tanks of water that are designed to replicate the river conditions. So the pH, the water temperature, etc. And you can control how many prey and predator are in each tank and measure the outcome. Okay. You can also measure the effect of warmer temperatures on different species to simulate what might happen if climate warming continues. Many hypotheses cannot be tested either because the amount of area or the length of time needed to test the hypothesis is too long, or it's just not possible to isolate the variable of interest. Natural experiments rely on natural variation in the environment to test a hypothesis. For example, the island biogeography theory predicts that the number of species on an island is influenced by the size of the island, because larger islands have more niches to support larger populations that resist extinction and are easier for organisms to find and thus to colonize. This would be impossible to test experimentally at large scales, so instead we can test this hypothesis by comparing the number of species living on islands of different size. The last approach to ecology I want to talk about today is mathematical models. In this approach, ecological systems are represented by equations that correspond to hypothesized relationships among the system components. For example, we might use a mathematical model to represent how births and immigration add to the growth rate of a population, and how deaths and emigration subtract from that growth rate. A mathematical model is simply a hypothesis. It states an explanation of the observed structure and functioning of the system. And we can test the accuracy of a model by comparing its predictions with observations in nature. So, for example, we can model the density of a microbial population using this equation. Don't worry, it's not as scary as it seems, because we're basically saying the density of microbes is based on its growth rate and its death rate. How many individuals are born and how many die over some unit of time. Then we say, well, the density of microbes is also influenced by how many individuals are born and die due to interactions with other microbes, and how many are born and die due to other factors related to, say, temperatures. Of course, microbes aren't born, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about here, I hope. Well, we've learned a lot about a number of different topics, and this case study will help you understand how they fit together in real life. Okay? We're going to be examining the sea otter off the Pacific coast. Humans have affected sea otter populations for hundreds of years. The sea otter is once abundant from Japan to Alaska and all the way to Baja California. So if you look up here, you can see the historical range where you used to see it in red, and now it is restricted to the yellow area. Of course, humans, it's always humans, it's always us. In the 1700s and 1800s, there was intense hunting for otter pellets. Okay. You can see examples here. And that reduced their populations to very near extinction. In the 1930s, they were placed under protection and their population recovered, but their distribution is still reduced from historical range. And so in the rest of the module, you'll learn about the details and complex interactions between the sea otter and its prey, its predators, and how this network maintains an entire ecosystem The activities and concept mapping, which you'll be doing, will help to make these connections for you. And I can't wait to see all of your brilliant contributions in Perceptive coming up and the concept maps. So I hope that you have a good week, and I will see you next time. And let me end on my cute little picture. Oops, there it is, my favorite little picture of the sea otter. So I wish you all a very good week, and I will see you soon.